Beth has returned home following the dramatic events in Mexico. She lives alone in her newly acquired home. For the first time alone, she reflects on her time with Mrs. Wheatley. The phone suddenly rings. It's Harry Beltic, the man Beth defeated in the state championship. He was referring to the idea that after hearing about her defeat against Borgov, he offered to assist her. Beth, who is lonely, agrees and invites him over. Moments later, Harry appears with a box of chess books, complimenting Beth on her appearance and stating that she is no longer the gawky kid who defeated him 5 years ago. They talk about what happened in her game, and Harry advises her to keep her options open rather than focusing on a single play, which will always result in a loss. Beth decides to play out a scenario using chess, proving Harry's point. She also compliments Harry, saying that something changed about him as well, but she is unable to specify what. Harry reveals it's his teeth, and Beth smiles broadly. He adds that he fixed it a while ago. She agrees with a smile. Harry decides to return to his hotel room, where he is staying temporarily until he can find an apartment. He tells Beth that he'll be back tomorrow with more books before leaving. While he's gone, Beth decides not to go to bed and instead curls up on the sofa to watch the familiar TV chatter that Mrs. Wheatley finds so comforting. The next morning, Harry returns and tells Beth that she needs to put in a lot of effort if she wants to beat Borgov. He tells her a short story about his chess career and explains how Borgov becomes world champion. While walking to the bathroom, Harry notices the vitamin pills in her bathroom and expresses concern. He keeps it quiet for the time being while Beth follows his advice and begins investigating Borgov, learning exactly what the Russian is capable of. As the days pass, the two continue to enjoy each other's company, playing and discussing chess. Every night, Beth reads about Borgov's career, and we see clips of his matches and interviews. Harry reveals that he is leaving his hotel and moving into an apartment. He also needs to look for a part-time job, so he won't be able to visit as frequently as he would like. Beth then invites him to live with her for free. Harry kisses her instinctively. When Beth does not respond, he quickly apologizes. She then tells him she isn't prepared. They eventually get together. In bed, Harry questions whether it is better to go to his room or stay with her. He has begun to develop feelings for Beth, but she is unwilling to even consider romance at the moment. The next day, Beth goes to the local store, where she runs into Margaret, one of the high school bullies. She informs Beth that she married shortly after graduating. Beth sarcastically tells her that she enjoys the chess lifestyle and traveling because of the thrill of seeing the boys. She refers to the boys because Margaret used to ask her about it when they were younger. Margaret has a baby, and she appears happy, but the wine bottles under the baby carriage tell us otherwise. That evening, Beth and Harry discuss chess again, but this time we see Harry attempting to confess his feelings for her. He tells her that she is the reason he had his teeth fixed and that he was waiting for her to return, but Beth quickly avoids the topic and changes the subject. Harry simply invites her to another game of chess. In the following game, Beth criticizes his slow playing style, prompting him to dismiss her as too sharp and walk away. Things are clearly tense between them, and Harry eventually packs his belongings and leaves. He needs to start studying as soon as possible. Beth says he has been extremely helpful to her. Harry confesses that he doesn't really love chess as much as he used to do and he's not absorbed in winning all. He gives her one last book before leaving and advises her to take care of herself. The action then shifts to Ohio for the 1967 U.S. Championship. Beth walks into the venue and runs into Benny Watts again. Unlike other sports such as golf or tennis, Benny expresses his thoughts on how they are treated. He likens their setup to that of the Soviet Union. Beth then informs him that she intends to visit the Soviet Union after winning the U.S. Championship. But Benny provokes her, telling her that she must first beat him. The tournament then continues as usual, with both of them crushing their opponents. Benny and Beth play their way into the final together as the days pass. While Benny talks to reporters to boost his ego, Beth continues to read up on tactics in between classes. Benny invites Beth over for a few rounds of speed chess and beers one evening, but she declines. Beth simply wants to study on her own, but her plans do not go as planned. She eventually walks over to get a cup of coffee when Benny approaches her again. He continues to invite her over for a game of speed chess, but this time he is betting $5 per game. Beth doesn't want to waste her time, so she declines the offer once more. Benny, on the other hand, insists on having someone else get her a cup of coffee. They begin to play, and the crowd grows larger with each round. Unfortunately, Beth always loses, forcing her to give him a large sum. The more Beth loses, the more people gather around her. Beth returns to her hotel room, completely agitated and sensitive. She begins to question her abilities. Beth is devastated and ends up sleeping it off. The next day, Beth asks Benny if his intention is to truly humiliate her. He dismisses her question, claiming that she is the best player in the room and that he has always been the best at speed chess. Beth, on the other hand, is humbled by the repeated losses. Benny apologizes for the speed chess gig and admits that he wasn't trying to take advantage of her. He also admits to playing chess with himself in his head. They fight in the final, and she easily beats him in 30 moves with such credibility. Benny and Beth are soon drinking at the bar, and Benny is furious about the quick loss. He consults her on the Moscow Invitational because the winner of the US State Championship is usually invited. Beth, it turns out, had no idea she'd been invited to the Moscow Invitational following her victory. Benny then offers to train her because he knows how the Russians play. He then invites her to visit him in New York. Beth eventually accepts his offer after much deliberation. Following that, we will be shown a flashback. Beth's biological mother warns her that men will come into her life to teach her different things, but that none of them will be smarter than she is. She also tells Beth that most people will accept anything just to say they have something. Beth and Benny are currently driving to New York to begin her training. They play chess while driving by reciting notations on their heads. Beth is also continuing her Russian studies while on the road trip. They eventually arrive at Benny's rundown apartment in New York. He lists all of his chess accomplishments. Beth appears surprised by the setting, and it takes her some time to adjust. Benny brings out an air mattress for her and informs her that there is no alcohol in the apartment. Benny and Beth spend the next day intensely practicing chess. They only leave the apartment to get supplies. The majority of their time is spent in front of a chessboard or analyzing famous games. Replaying play after play so Beth can compete against the world's best players, the Soviets. Benny invites some friends over one night and introduces them to Beth. Hilton, Arthur, and Cleo are their names. In the kitchen, Beth quickly becomes acquainted with her female colleague, Cleo. She tells Beth that her friends saved her from committing suicide. After preparing food, Benny invites Beth to play with all three of them at the same time, but she has other plans. She wagers $10 each that she will beat all three of them at speed chess. The games begin when Benny agrees. They play 3 rounds, and she beats all three of them at the same time, over and over. Benny eventually stops the play and tells Beth that she's finally got it. He tells her that no one has ever done anything like that to him in 15 years. Beth claims to be sober, so it must be helping her focus. The following scene shows Beth arriving in Paris in 1967. She attends a conference and responds to questions about Borgov. The press informs Beth that some people believe she is too glamorous to be taken seriously in chess. She responds that it's easier to play chess without the weight of an Adam's apple. Another reporter inquired if she was looking forward to a rematch with Borgov. Beth responds emphatically in the affirmative. She goes on to say that she always watched Borgov's games, particularly their match in Mexico City. Beth will eventually face Borgov in the tournament. Cleo calls her one night while she's in Paris and asks if she'd like one drink. Beth succumbs to the temptation and joins her. The tournament begins, and Beth, as usual, defeats each of her opponents one by one. After a few rounds, the staff approaches her and informs her that her next and final match will be against Borgov. Beth receives a phone call the night before the finals, as she is preparing for her match. Cleo offers Beth a drink because she is also in Paris. She politely declines, but Beth is tempted and eventually succumbs and joins Cleo. Beth revealed after a few drinks that she had fallen in love with Towns. Cleo proposes a toast to unrequited love and then proceeds to entertain the men who had been staring at them for a long time. Beth wakes up in the bath the next morning, takes a pill, and leaves Cleo in her room. After quickly getting ready, she heads down to her game with Borgov, realizing she is late for the big day. Beth is obviously still hungover from last night's party. She tries to gain control of her situation, but she deteriorates as the game progresses. Borgov notices that she is constantly thirsty and that she is unprepared. Cleo enters the audience and begins to panic, asking for more water. She was clearly going to lose the game after a few more moves. Beth resigns as a tear falls down her cheek. She walks away without saying anything or showing Borgov any courtesy. Later, Benny calls and invites her to return to New York. Beth, on the other hand, prefers to be alone at the moment. To make matters worse, Beth must go into legal action as soon as she returns home. Mr. Wheatley refused to sign the papers making Beth the legal owner of the house, according to her lawyer. Later, Mr. Wheatley and her attorney arrive to discuss the situation. Beth addresses him directly and tells him to keep his promise because he adopted her. Mr. Wheatley obviously didn't care about her, nor did he care about his wife, Mrs. Wheatley. He admits that he didn't want to adopt her and had only signed the papers to silence Mrs. Wheatley. Now he wants to sell the house, forcing Beth to relocate. Beth offers to buy the house, but she will deduct the cost of burying her adopted mother. Mr. Wheatley reluctantly agrees and storms away. Beth then decides to remodel the house now that it is finally hers. She takes out the old furniture and replaces it with new wallpaper. She eventually receives a letter from the Christian Crusade, a non-profit organization that wants to help her with her financial needs for the Moscow Invitational. Over the phone, Beth and Ben discuss the organization. He tells her that it is the same group that assisted him in Moscow. He instructs her to take the money and attend the competition. Beth, perplexed, asks him why they would spend so much money on her. Benny responds that they want her to beat communists in the name of Jesus. Benny tells Beth on the phone that he misses her and expresses a desire to rekindle their relationship, but Beth does not respond. Beth decides to dine out like she and Mrs. Wheatley used to do for fun and to take her mind off things while preparing for a local tournament. However, what begins as harmless fun ends disastrously. She drinks so much that her trash can is full of empty bottles. Beth is still spending her time at home dancing, drinking, and smoking. She nearly dies after passing out and hitting her head on her coffee table. At the same time, Harry knocks on her door, but no one answers because Beth is still unconscious. Beth hears the phone ring when she comes to her senses. The call is from the local tournament director, who has asked her to arrive early for the tournament tomorrow in order to take photos with the local paper. Beth agrees to arrive early despite the fact that she is a complete mess. The next day, she attends the tournament, where she meets a woman. She's the same girl Beth played her first match in the state championship with. The girl expresses her gratitude to Beth for demonstrating to the world that women can excel at chess. She goes out for a smoke after their conversation and runs into Harry. He confronts Beth, saying he is concerned about her and that she requires assistance. He has seen her in the supermarket from the office, where he is the assistant manager, and informs her that she is becoming an alcoholic. He hopes that his father's experience as an alcoholic will enable him to assist her. Harry expresses his desire that Beth not suffer the same fate as his father. When he realizes she isn't listening to him, he wishes her luck and drives away. Beth does not attend the tournament after this and instead returns home. She looks in the mirror and realizes what a shambles she has become. Beth eventually falls asleep and is awoken by a knock on her door. She believes it is Harry, but it is actually her old friend Jolene. The following scene is a flashback in which young Beth and her biological mother travel to her father's new home. Beth's mother begs him for assistance, but he is not pleased to see her and tells her to leave. This brings us up to the time when Beth and her mother were driving down the road just before the horrific accident. Back in the present, Jolene explains why she's there. Mr. Shable has died, and a funeral will be held soon. She wants Beth to come, but she can't help but notice the state of her house. We learn that Jolene is currently studying to be a paralegal, having recovered from her orphanage experience and clearly turned her life around. Beth, on the other hand, realizes she needs to do the same with hers. Later, Jolene inspects the bathroom cabinet and notices the vitamin pills. Beth is addicted to the medication, she realizes. The two set out on a road trip to revisit Beth's old haunts. The first is an old trailer she shared with her birth mother. It's pretty run down, which eventually leads them to the orphanage. Beth decides not to enter the orphanage because flashbacks are too much for her. Instead, she attends Mr. Shable's funeral, where she feels bad about owing him $10 from her first tournament. Beth changes her mind after the service and returns to the home where she spent the majority of her childhood. She walks down the corridor, feeling nostalgic. Miss Deardoff tells her to return to the chapel, and Beth agrees politely and heads down to the basement where Mr. Shable lives. She discovers a large pin-up board with all of her newspaper clippings, pictures, and memories from her childhood. Mr. Shable had compiled a list of all her accomplishments and news stories. She also sees a picture of Mr. Shable and her together, which causes her to snap. Beth regrets not paying her master a visit while he was still alive. She realizes Mr. Shable genuinely cared about her and adored her. It's all too much for Beth to bear, and she sobs in the car with Jolene. Back at home, the Christian Crusade comes to see Beth and asks her to make a statement against communism because they believe it spreads atheism. But Beth rejects their beliefs and decides to return the money they've spent on her so far. This means she must manage her own funding for the Moscow trip. With nowhere else to turn, Beth calls Benny and requests money. He's not having it, especially after she ditched him in New York, and eventually tells her not to call again. Beth requires funding quickly, so she contacts authorities and banks, but no one is willing to assist her. Later, while playing squash with Jolene, she confesses that she regrets purchasing the house. Jolene offers to cover Beth's travel expenses. She wants to be there for Beth as if she were family. In 1968, the action shifts to Russia. Beth has State Department security as part of her trip. On the plane, her security lays down the rules, such as reporting anything suspicious and not drinking. Beth continues to mock the complex rules because some of them are illogical. She's even told to stay in her hotel and not speak to anyone else. Beth wins her first game and follows the rules on tournament day. The Russians are surprised to see a woman like her compete in the World Championship because no woman has ever played against a man. Beth continues to win games, and the more rounds she wins, the more popular she becomes among the locals, with Beth having to sign numerous autographs. In Russia, she has become a sensation. Beth continues to defeat formidable grandmasters, though one of the games must be postponed due to the late hour. Before going to her room, she sees her latest opponent, Borgov, plotting her demise. Beth practices the plays that night. When the game resumes the next day, she defeats the grandmaster. The opponent compliments her on being the best chess player he's ever faced. She beats her second opponent as well, but it all adds up to exhaustingly long, mentally taxing games. Beth goes to bed that night and remembers her biological mother calling her the problem. Her mother instructs her to close her eyes as she accelerates the car. Beth then disposes of her vitamin pills by flushing them down the toilet. We learn that she will face the formidable Borgov again in the final. The final day arrives, and all eyes are on Borgov and Beth as they compete on the chessboard with their exceptional chess skills. The crowd is captivated by the game being played out in front of them as the two make their move. Borgov, however, decides to adjourn the meeting halfway through. With the entire world watching, Beth tries to maintain her modesty despite her agent's insistence on speaking to the press. On her way out, she mentions Shable and how influential he has been in her life, and she advises them to print the story. However, just as she is about to leave, a familiar face from the past appears. Towns has arrived. They exchange hugs before discussing their different fates in life. As yet another sign of good news, Harry, Benny, and the rest of the boys phone in from New York to give Beth advice and strategies for defeating Borgov. Beth uses all of the brilliant minds gathered together as she prepares to go in for her big achievement. The final game is played the following day, and it is as tense as ever. Beth takes a deep breath and realizes she no longer needs the pills to harness her power. For the first time, she notices the chessboard on the ceiling without the pills. Borgov requests a draw as they continue to play. The audience believes Beth should settle, but she shakes her head solemnly. For her, the endgame is everything. Beth makes her final move, and she appears victorious as she realizes what she has just accomplished. Borgov smiles as he looks her in the eyes and says, "The game is yours." He resigns, and Beth receives ecstatic applause as the new world champion.
Good for you, Cracker.
Following this, the victory brings back a wave of publicity to America, and Beth is invited to play chess with the president in the White House. It's significant that she beat the Soviets at their own game. Instead of returning to America, Beth decides to enjoy the bliss she has just discovered. In the final scene, Beth walks among the various chess players in Moscow's park, enjoying the unexpected acclaim she receives from the men and women there. She is encouraged to play chess with the locals, which she gladly accepts.